Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, part of the Bet the Board podcast network. A little super speedway racing last weekend from Talladega, and much to the chagrin of all of our loyal listeners, our best bet comes home in second place at a robust price of 14-1. But rest assured, great tracks on the horizon starting this week with Dover, and a busy show with a phenomenal interview that I know all of you guys and girls will enjoy. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional NASCAR bettor and racing analyst, our colleague on this fine program, Chris Werme. And Wormser, I have to ask the question that all of our listeners want to know. Did you watch a single lap of live racing last weekend from Talladega?
I did not.
So
I did not.
You've held true. You've held true to your axiom that when it comes to super speedway racing, you don't want to succumb to the temptation that is some of the live betting phenomenon. Did you watch the race recap and replay?
I'll say this. I received multiple texts, I guess, after the race was over of, family and friends that did either watch or pay attention to the race. And I don't know if you know this or not, but I actually went to high school with his name is Bill Keselowski and Lee Keselowski. These are brothers that were cousins of Brad Keselowski. And I got a text from Bill Keselowski that said, Brad just got fucked. And that's how I knew that our bet did not win, is Brad just got, screwed to a message from Bill. So I did go back and rewatch, and man, if you were a Brad Keselowski fan, I understand why you feel that way. But if you put yourself in Michael McDowell's shoes, you have to do that. I know that in Denny's podcast, when it comes to blocking, he said it never works, but what also doesn't get him in the playoffs is him finishing second. And if I'm on a team and my driver has a chance to win the race coming off of 4 going through the tri-oval at Talladega, I want him to block his ass off too. So I guarantee you it would have been different, or it is different when you have money on it. 100%. It's hard to see. It's hard to kind of clear away that bias, but I do understand.
That is an accurate assessment for anybody that has bet. You have to try and come at it from an impartial viewpoint, which isn't always easy for folks that are doing this as a recreational pursuit. That's for sure.
But to Denny's point, he thought he actually had a better chance of winning the race by getting side by side and maybe side drafting. Remember that start finish line does take a long time for you to get there. You think it's going to be right when the cars cross in front of the camera, but it's actually a little further past that. So maybe Brad's run kind of just dissolves, and in the 34 is able to get a little bit of a side draft and maybe peek the nose out for a victory. I don't know. We won't ever get there. But there's could the caution have come out? If that's the case, Brad then wins. Lots of ifs, ands, and buts for Brad Keselowski ticket holders. That's for sure.
There is no doubt about it. And for those folks tuning into the Stay Green podcast for the first time, we typically break things up around here. Stage 1, all about what we learned from the previous race and how we can apply those lessons going forward. Stage 2 is normally a full race breakdown, but we have a very special interview with America's crew chief, Larry McReynolds, that we're thrilled to share with you for Stage 2 this week. And Stage 3, normally about how to make everyone a smarter NASCAR bettor, but this week we'll pivot a little bit and it will be a in-depth breakdown of what we will see unfold at Dover. So rather than rehashing all of Talladega, although we will return there in the playoffs where the stakes are a little bit greater, there's no reason, Wormser, that we should hold back the interview that I think all of our listeners will truly enjoy. It's always a pleasure when we get Larry Mack to jump into the hot seat and ask him all of those hard-hitting questions and all the things that we find fascinating. We know you will as well. If you're a fan of NASCAR, and why wouldn't you be if you're listening to the Stay Green podcast, you know this man's work. He has been a fixture of the NASCAR on Fox telecast for years. He is America's crew chief. You can follow him on Twitter at Larry Mac28. And Larry, I know normally we'd start with the hard-hitting NASCAR questions, but I have to ask you the most important question of all. Where were you when Nick Saban announced his retirement from your beloved Crimson Tide, and how many adult tears did you shed at that particular moment?
Todd, it's funny you asked that, because I will never forget, as long as I live, where I was and what I was doing. So it just happened to be January the 10th, the day of my 65th birthday. And my longtime Fox teammate, Jeff Hammond, you know Jeff, he had called me to wish me a happy birthday. And I'm sitting outside my downstairs man cave, and I always watch the Paul Feinbaum show in the afternoon. I always learn something about the SEC from old Paul Feinbaum. I cut the sound down. I'm talking to Jeff. He's wishing me a happy birthday, and we're just catching up. And all of a sudden, I saw across the bottom of the scroll, breaking news. And I'm reading it, and it's like, I'm reading it again. And I went, Jeff, I'll have to call you back.
Hey, look, a man who bleeds for the Crimson Tide football team. I think they'll be in good hands with Kalen DeBoer. We'll see if he can pick up where the maestro left off. And, of course, for all the Bet the Board listeners, they know our college football preview shows, Larry, right around the corner. Also want to remind all of our listeners that you can see all Larry's great work on Fox, Race Hub throughout the course of the week. And you can catch him with a good friend of the show, Danielle Trotta, on Sirius XM Radio. And Larry, when we look at what's gone on, I mean, we're now 10 races into the season. So we'll give you a softball to get you started. And I'm going to let Chris hit you with the hard-hitting questions. What have been some of the biggest takeaways for you and your perspective through the first 10 races, knowing we've seen road courses, we've seen short tracks, we've seen super speedways, and it seems to be that a couple of drivers and race teams have really separated themselves from the rest of the field?
Yeah, probably no surprise. It's Hendrick Motorsports and Joe Gibbs Racing. They've won 8 of our 10 races. The only other drivers to win is Daniel Suarez, won the Atlanta race back in race number 2. And then most recently this past weekend, Tyler Reddick, who drives for 2311, that I might say is a branch off the Joe Gibbs Racing family tree. That's the only 2 drivers that doesn't drive for Rick or for the coach that's been to victory lane. Probably the other takeaway is kind of on the negative side. Ford came out with this new dark horse Mustang that they really were excited about. And after 10 races, they still have not been to victory lane. In fact, they have not found victory lane in any of the top 3 series of NASCAR, not trucks, not Xfinity, and not Cup. So I'm sure that's not setting well with Edsel Ford, with Marsh Rushbrook, who's the guy over Ford Motorsports globally. Didn't see this coming. I thought, Ryan Blaney won the championship last year, driving a Ford, seemed to carry the Ford banner, and I thought give them a better race car, then they'll really excel. But it's not come to fruition so far this year.
Chris, before you jump in, I want to ask Larry a quick follow-up there. When you look at it, Larry, you've been in and around the garage. You've talked to people on all the racing teams. How worried do you think Ford should be? I know it's a limited sample size. We see the ebbs and flows. You mentioned Ryan Blaney last year. I think if we were talking about potential championship contenders 10 races into the 2023 season, nobody would have talked about the 12 whatsoever. Can Ford make up this ground as the season progresses? I mean, we saw Chris Buescher come out of nowhere late last year, Ryan Blaney as well. But, as terms of a panic meter, I mean, where should Ford be looking right now? Or is it, hey, let's pump the brakes, we're going to work through this, and it's no reason to be alarmed this early in the campaign?
As close as the competition is, Todd, they could hit on it on any given week. To your point, I know you said 10 races last year on Ryan Blaney. I'll go well beyond that.
Yeah.
Headed into the playoffs. His name is Ryan Blaney. I call him Bracket Buster because I'm not sure a lot of people had him going much beyond the round of 16, the first round, but they started peaking at the right time. Even Joey Logano in 22, I'm not sure we had him as going to the championship 4 and winning the championship, but he was the guy hoisting the trophy out there at Phoenix in November of 22. The thing about it, if you're off, we're talking crumbs. I that scoring monitor every single week, whether it's practice, whether it's qualifying, whether it's the race, and you're talking the difference between first and 25th, a couple of tenths of a second. It's not like they're a second off. They're just a tenth or two off. And so, yeah, I do think they can find it. And I'm confident with the minds they have over there at Stewart Haas Racing, RK Racing, Team Penske. They will eventually figure it out a lot like they did last year.
Yeah. What is, we always hear on the broadcast, or we hear throughout, NASCAR journalists talking about how that 12 team just found something late in the season. Because after they won at Talladega, it's like, okay, now they have a legitimate shot at winning this championship. But we hadn't quite seen the speed that we saw those last 4 races. I mean, they were the fastest in practice. They may have slipped up in qualifying, but as soon as that green flag dropped on Sunday, they were the guy to beat. What does a NASCAR team find? What did they find? Was it just an aero thing, or what are some of the things that teams are looking for to gain that competitive advantage? Because right now it looks like it's really hard to pass, and Ryan Blaney made it look easy late in the season last year. So what did they find?
When you think about a race car, Chris, you take the driver out of it. You've got 3 other elements. You've got the aerodynamics, you've got the chassis, the setup, and then you've got horsepower. And I think right now everybody has kind of tabled the horsepower. I don't think anybody is pointing toward the Roush Yates horsepower. You can never have too much, right, but I'm not sure they're looking at that as the problem. Normally when you're off, it's normally not just one thing. It's normally 2 or 3 things. And I think with this new Dark Horse Mustang body, they feel like they haven't gotten the balance yet. And when I say balance, you've got front downforce, you've got rear downforce. You want all the downforce you can get, because that's what makes the car grip in the corner, but you can't have an imbalance. You can't have an overabundance of front and not enough rear, and vice versa. And I think they feel like that's what they've done with this Ford Dark Horse Mustang. Obviously, it has good speed at the super speedways.
Yeah, right.
When you look at Joey Logano set on the pole for the Daytona 500. The Ford set on the pole for Atlanta, the other super speedway race number 2. Michael McDowell set on the pole for Talladega. They've got the speed at the super speedways. I think it's just the aero balance at the intermediate tracks.
Okay. Well, what about, let's kind of switch up things to Dover. When you're looking at track comps, does Dover stand alone, or do you take maybe some elements of just the fact that it's concrete? Do you look at, a Nashville or a Bristol, or I know it's a mile, but it's so different than Phoenix. When you're setting up a car for Dover, where are you looking, or what notebook, or is it the previous year, or where are you looking to help set up a race car for this track?
Well, and I think it's one reason that when you look at the drivers that's won at Dover and the teams, it's normally championship teams. Yeah. It's the teams that has the thicker notebooks. And I think if you look at I think I read 22 races there. Denny Hamlin and Alex Bowman, they're only 2 drivers that's won there that's not a Cup Series champion. Wow. So I think experience definitely prevails. Aero-wise, you've got some characteristics of some of the intermediates. You mentioned Nashville Super Speedway. It's different from Nashville, but there are some similar characteristics, most notably the concrete surface. But I even go back to my years as a crew chief, Chris. Dover was kind of an animal of its own. It is a very challenging racetrack. That concrete surface, it's ever-changing. The more the rubber goes down, and then you'll have a caution come out, no hot tires pick the rubber back up. Then you got a green racetrack again. You've really got to stay on top of staying ahead of the racetrack. And just the way it's a 1-mile racetrack, but you spend 3/4 of a lap in the corners because the straightaways are just not that long. And oh, by the way, the straightaways are banked more than some corners we go to.
Yeah.
It's banked 9 degrees. We call it the self-cleaning racetrack. How many times do you see a car on its own just hit the outside wall, late exit of turn 2 or turn 4, because of the 9 degrees of banking, they ricochet and come down the straightaway right in front of a bunch of cars?
Yeah.
And we got a big one. And we're not even at Daytona or Talladega. That happens more than not at that 1-mile track. It just 400 miles around that place. I've never driven it, but I'm there for 18 years as a crew chief, now 24 years as a broadcaster. When you win there, you know you have done more than a day's work.
Yeah, we've seen, I guess, to stay on this concrete, the only struggles we've seen, I guess, with Goodyear from a cording perspective has happened at Dover these kind of last 2 years and then Bristol this past year. So, two-part question. What is it about concrete that makes this? Is it the concrete? And if it is, what about the concrete makes that cording happen? And then is there, I don't know, I like tire conservation. I like tire fall off. But when I think about that, I think about Homestead, I think about Darlington, where there's somewhere between no fall off and cording. Is that a thing, or am I just imagining something? Because what we saw at Bristol this year was, okay, we have cording, we have an issue with tires going down. It seems like you were able to manage your tires, but it was more of an instantaneous, within 3 laps, you went from getting back to the gas to just feathering this thing, trying to either get it to pit road or hope a caution came out.
And what a fun race that was.
Yeah.
If finally we've got a race where it's truly in the driver's hands. You know, Denny Hamlin, I think, has won, 52, 53 races. He said that might be the first race I've won where I felt like I really made a big, big difference. It wasn't all about my race car. It was about me being smart enough to conserve tires. Now, I think there's somewhere a happy median. I don't want to see a tire at Bristol that you can run 190 laps on like
Right.
we've had before, but I'd like to see it run a little further than 35 or 40 laps. But I think we ended up, Chris, with the perfect storm at Bristol. I think the tire that Goodyear brought there, the temperature just wasn't warm enough. The concrete needs temperature to be able to take rubber. And it was just not quite warm enough for that rubber to lay down. And when the rubber don't go down, that's what wears the tires out. We're looking at temperatures in the high 70s at Dover on Sunday. Yeah. I think we'll be okay for that standpoint. But, you know, I have never said, I've always said, I do not envy Goodyear because they walk on a razor blade every single week. They want to make a tire that's not too hard, that has fall off, that has give up, but they don't want to make it so soft where we start popping tires. You pop a tire at Dover, oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
You'll think a tractor and trailer has run over you because you're at the bottom of the racetrack running 150, 60, 70 miles an hour. You blow a right front tire, boom, straight in the wall. I'm telling you, that's why they don't make T-shirts with crew cheese on them. Let me make T-shirts. But I think what they're bringing the same tire combination there that we ran a year ago. Mm-hmm. But I think because of where we're going to be with the ambient temperature,
be okay.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you we won't wear tires out, because if we have a bunch of cautions and it just won't take that rubber, that's what wears the tires. But I think all the environment seems like we'll be okay.
Okay, last question before I turn it over to Todd.
Yeah, go for it.
Let's just rewind back to this this Bristol. Let's say that they anticipate the same type of thing to happen. They look at the weather and it's going to be the same tire combination when we go back, and they expect the same kind of things. Will crew chiefs and teams set the car up way more for the long run versus a short run? And will these guys that I think are super talented, drivers, crew chiefs, engineers, will they be able to make this tire last 70, 80 laps? Because I think where the issue is it was just a surprise, and it turned into, oh, we better just make a decision on the fly as to how we're going to approach this race. I don't know. I'm of the thinking that if they know going in, it would be a completely different race. And I think it might be exactly what we're looking for, is that 70, 80, 90 lap run versus the 35.
Could not agree more. And it's not completely my opinion. Chris Gabehart, Denny Hamlin's crew chief, who won that race, I asked him something very similar to that a few days after that race. Would you approach the race different had you went up there knowing what you were going to encounter? And he said, absolutely. Absolutely. We would have been a lot less aggressive with things like, the shock settings. with camber, all the things that's kind of hard on a race tire that enhances wear and give up. He said we would have definitely been a little more conservative. But we got an all-star race coming up in about a month. And I think there's a method to the madness of what they're going to try up there. We're actually going to have two different compounds. We're going to have the prime compound, which is the normal tire, and we're going to have an option tire, which is a much softer tire.
Yeah.
And All-Star Race is a special event. It's all about winning. It's a 200-lap race, and you're going to see crew chiefs playing between the two different compounds, and I think it's going to be fun. It'll probably have my head spinning from a strategy standpoint.
Sure.
But I think the other method to the madness, the hidden agenda, is what we learn from this, maybe going forward, especially at some of our 1 mile and under tracks.
Yeah, it's been so wild to see, Larry, because I feel like we tried that a couple of years ago, and which All-Star Race eludes me there. I know there was a lot of optimism at the high tire where we saw it North Wilkesboro last season, and the rain tire was great. That thing basically, we saw the kind of fall off we were anticipating. And it's so fascinating because I think you're exactly right. And Greg Stucker made the same kind of comments that concrete provides such different challenges for Goodyear, knowing that it's a little bit more difficult to lay rubber down. We've seen the experimentation with, different track compounds and everything else. Going back to your days as a crew chief, was there a particular track type that you enjoyed more than any other when it came to setting up the car, getting it to more or less go hand in hand with the driver style? And you can't use Daytona because I know that's your favorite track through and through. So we're eliminating Daytona completely from this equation for you.
Well, I'm going to go back to something Chris said. Tracks that had tire degradation, tire fall off. And 3 tracks that come to mind, Rockingham, Darlington, and then Wilkesboro. Wilkesboro was wore out until we just repaved it. That place was absolutely wore out. You felt like you could make a big difference in the way you set the car up. You felt like as a crew chief, you could make a big difference in the adjustments you made under pit stops, but then your driver could make a big difference because it was about tire management. You could stick some young rookie in that car with brand new, fresh sticker Goodyear tires, and they could go like gangbusters. And I'd tell my driver, just stand by. He'll come back to us. You'll be going by him shortly because, again, the veterans, the experience knew you got to pace yourself here. This is what we've got to do, a lot like we saw at Bristol. And so, yeah, I enjoyed those tracks where I felt like the way I set the car up, the adjustments I made, and then my guy gripping that steering wheel could make a big difference. But you mentioned that rain tire that we did race in the heat races at North Wilkesboro last year. That's what this option tire is. It's basically the compound of the rain tire, but just made in the form of a slick tire. So the grip level is going to be much softer, a lot like that rain tire.
So it'll be faster on the short run, but fall off more quickly is the theory.
Question. And we're talking about a second or second and a half faster.
Okay.
Per lap in the early going.
Wow.
Lap 20, that's probably going to flip-flop.
So it's what we always talk about, Chris, what we kind of see in F1 races when we watch those. Do you want that short run speed to pick up track position early, or do you want to hope that Larry Mac's trends spit out a caution flag with about 8 to go and you're able to go from 17th all the way up to first, with a little limited distance left in front of you? But I mean, Larry, you mentioned Denny Hamlin, and Chris and I listen to Actions Detrimentals. I think every NASCAR fan should for his firsthand perspective. And I think some of the points he brings up there are interesting, and always curious to get your take. Denny has taken some risks late in races, no greater illustration than what he did at Texas in terms of, hey, I want to sacrifice what will be a good finish for a race win. He called it a 50-50 proposition. I think the rest of us out there doing the math said it was about a 95% failure rate for him to try and get to the outside. But how did you balance that with your drivers, whether they were inexperienced, whether they were veterans, trying to figure out how to be able to maximize your finish, but knowing the current format we're in NASCAR now definitely rewards those wins in terms of getting some of those bonus points that you can carry with you throughout the course of the postseason?
I think that's the key, Todd. We're in such a different format now because, as I've heard Denny Hamlin say, as I've heard Chris Gabehart, his crew chief, say, and he has those 2 wins. When you get a win, and especially when you get 2 wins, it gives you a bigger playbook. You can go down the road of different things where if you're one of those guys, like right now, Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, just hanging around that cutoff line for the playoffs, you've not been to victory lane. You can't be near as aggressive. You can't be near as aggressive the way you drive the race car. You can't be near as aggressive of things you try with the race car or maybe with strategy on the way you work pit stops. Where my years, we wanted to win every race, but you know what? Sometimes let's just take this third place finish because that's just going to put more points in our points bucket because that's what it's all about. From Daytona to November, just stacking as many points as we can. So I think it's just a different mindset. Once you get that win in the regular season, especially 2 wins, it just opens up the playbook because now all that matters now, for the most part, is more wins and more stage wins because that's more playoff points.
Yeah, I think that's why Michael McDowell, I don't blame him for blocking Brad as much as he did. There's 9 tracks that Michael McDowell is saying, hey, we have a legit shot of winning. We have to block. And there's a lot of people that were critical of it. But if you're on that 34 team, you have to say, hey, you have a chance coming to the checker. You better do everything you can to get us in the playoffs because that will give them the ability to be flexible on these road courses, which are going to be in the playoffs. So I think that's a good point. Now to kind of piggyback this Denny Hamlin question or this risky thing, he has made it quite clear he would rather win 60 races, 65 races than a championship. As a crew chief, what would you prefer? The driver that wants to go out there and, hey, I want you to be a part of this 65-win career? Or do you want a guy that's like, hey, let's win championships?
I'll take either. I'll take either. It sounds good what Denny Hamlin is saying, but are we absolutely 100% sure that's the way he feels?
Lets him off the hook.
Question. Yeah, I mean, I know he loves winning races. I loved winning races. Denny's won 3 Daytona 500s. I was fortunate enough to win 2. But all I do know is when I walk by my trophy case every single day and I look at this spot that I had reserved for a championship trophy and it's sitting vacant, man, it stings. It stings and it stings bad. I don't care how many races you win. Yeah, people remember you for winning a Daytona 500. They maybe remember you for winning some of the other bigger races, the Coke 600, the Southern 500, the Brickyard, but they really remember you when you win a championship.
I mean, Larry, you should at least take solace that you have those Daytona 500 trophies to look at. Chris walks out of the house every day and just stares his reflection in the mirror, hoping that there's going to be some level of greatness that he's yet to achieve, at least at this point, in his life. But when you look at all of that and you try and figure, hey, we have to balance points with wins and everything else. I think we asked you this question when we had you on last year, but I feel it's always interesting to get your perspective on it. How early in a race weekend does a team know what kind of car they're going to have? Do you have expectations before you even unload? Is it a 20-minute practice session where you go, you know what? We thought we were going to have a 10th to 12th place car, but now suddenly we're aiming for 5 to 7. Or, you know what, we're not going to know exactly what kind of car we have until we put it out there on the track and we won through stage 1 to know what kind of adjustments we'll have in our box in terms of what good realistic expectations you have for any given race weekend.
It's a great question. I think the teams have a pretty good idea when they unload that car because of all the resources and all the tools. You think about all the simulation. I guarantee you, as we sit here right now, all of these major teams, they're either in their Toyota simulator, the Ford simulator, the Chevrolet simulator, just making lap after lap after lap at Dover, making changes to the car to see how it affects. But at the end of the day, the real world is that racetrack. And I know for a fact on a pretty regular basis, I'll talk to crew chiefs, to engineers, even drivers that go, this is not what we're supposed to have. It was supposed to be better than this. Pretty early indoor run in that little, Todd, I don't even call it a practice session. Yeah. It's a tuning session. You really can't make a lot of changes to the car because the car's already under impound. You can only fine tune things, but I would say both racetracks by lap 8 to 10 of a practice run, maybe depending on what size track you're at, that driver, that crew chief, they got a pretty good idea what they've got headed into the weekend. And you know what? Sometimes by lap 8 or 10, you go, boys, we're in trouble. It's going to be
does that open up strategy though? I feel like the pressure of having a race winning car and trying to essentially rear view mirror strategy, like let's just try to stay with the leaders. Whereas you see someone like Chase, who qualified terribly at Texas, wasn't running very well all day, says, you know what, we're going to run this long. Our tires look good. Hope we get a caution. I just feel like they're so conservative when they have a race winning car. Like, let's just put ourselves in position to win, where if you're just running 21st and you're like, well, we got nothing to lose, as long as whatever strategy cycles out and we cycle out better than 21st, or we have a chance at finishing 4 or 5 spots better than our average running spot, they go ahead and say, let's gamble. And so does that factor in as a crew chief? Is like, okay, we don't have the fastest car. Okay, now what strategies can we take where if we do get the lucky caution, that improves our finish relative to our average running position?
I see it every single week that you'll see a team that's can barely run inside the top 10 and they try something different. But I've always said, if you just follow the leader, guess what? You're going to follow the leader. I did it many times as a crew chief. One that jumps off the map to me was, we were at Watkins Glen. I was there with Mike Skinner in the 31 car. I think it might have been 1999. And we had about a 15th place car. And we could run 30 laps on fuel. Caution came out with about 34, 35 to go. Nobody was in their fuel window. Everybody stayed out. I said, pit. And I know my team manager was beating me on the arm going, we can't take it from here. I said, we're going to do our damnedest and try. And I started hammering on Mike. I mean, we restarted 30th maybe.
Yeah.
Because everybody had stayed out. But as we got into that window, this guy pitted. Next thing I know, we're leading the race with about a 20-second lead.
Right.
The problem, though, I encountered, I had to slow him down so much, we ended up finishing, I think, 4th. But we turned a 15th place car, barely 15th place car, into a top 5 car, not by making the race car better, just by trying something unorthodox with strategy.
Did you have him go like hell early in that run and just say pick up as many spots? Or was it, hey, let's just conserve?
Hell no. I said, here's the lap time I need you to run. Yeah. I don't care. You put blinders on. In fact, if you want to put blinders on like that, that's fine. Here's what we got to do, or you're going to run out of gas.
It's so wild. And I think, all of our listeners that follow NASCAR in and out realize there's a hell of a lot more to the sport when it comes to strategy, tire management, and all the things that go into a championship team. I mean, Chris and I, Larry, have talked about the emphasis placed on pit crews these days in the next gen car, knowing that a second lost on pit road can sometimes be impossible to try and pick up, even with 150, 200 laps. If you have a fast race car, once you lose that track position, it becomes so hard to try and get it back, as clean air has become the great equalizer on a variety of fronts. But, Chris, I know you had a hard-hitting question for Larry that you want to ask him. So we'll see if he is willing and able to try and potentially alienate himself from everybody in the garage, if you want to know which crew chief job he's ready to take over. So yeah. I'm going to let you.
Okay, so you have to win a championship. You have to win a championship this year. No, you just have to. That's your only goal. What crew chief's job are you taking right now? If your job is to win a championship based on what you've seen so far this year.
I believe I'm going to slide in there where old Rudy Fugle is, William Byron. That team, they have speed every single week. They have speed in qualifying. They have speed the early part, the middle part, and they know how to close the deal. William Byron has figured it out. You look at his 3 wins this year, they've come at 3 completely different size racetracks. The Daytona 500, one of the biggest tracks, Martinsville, the smallest, and then he did it turning left and right out there on the road course. I could probably name you about 10, but that's the one that, at least right now, after 10 races, kind of jumps off the page.
I saw a stat that was kind of interesting. I think it came from Eric Estep, and then Daniel Cespedes retweeted it. Stage points for Byron is kind of shockingly low. You have Kyle Larson with 110, Blaney 77, Denny 76, Truex 74, Elliott 62, and then I have ... Byron 50. That's kind of shocking for as much as it seems like when he takes control of a race, I've said he's the closest comparison we've seen to Jimmy Johnson, because once they get control, they don't make a mistake on pit road. The driver doesn't make a mistake. They do a great job of finishing races. I'm kind of shocked at just 50 stage points, because he can disappear a little bit. I know the issue with the trash bag at Vegas. Otherwise, I think you would have seen him pick up some more stage points, maybe even a win. Is that something they need to clean up a little bit?
Yeah, I actually talked to Rudy Fugle. I did a sit-down interview with him before the Texas race, and we talked two things we talked about. Stage points, and even though there's no points paid, they're not leading a lot of laps. And he said that's definitely something we're talking about internally. But as he also pointed out, he said, guess what the most important lap to lead each week is? And I said, well, that's pretty simple. The last one, he said, that's the one we focus on.
Yeah, I mean, 5% of laps led so far this season. I know, Chris, it's the discussion we always have when we go through our metrics, Larry, and try and figure out how we're going to build our race cards. What should we be looking at? Finishing position, running order, and you try and assess some of those underlying things. But it seems that every single week, if you have a bet against the 24, unless he's wrecked and in the garage, that thing isn't safe until the final lap is rattled off. And he's just one of those guys that you don't want to bet against, given how that race team doesn't beat itself, whether it's on pit road, whether it's just trying to pick off car by car, regardless of the machine that Williams had under him. And I think it's going to make him extremely formidable as we get deeper into the postseason, knowing how unforgiving the new revamped playoff schedule looks like. So it should be fascinating to see. But Chris, I wasn't sure if you had anything else you wanted to pepper Larry with, since he's been so generous with his time. And I know he is a busy man during the middle of the week with all those media responsibilities.
I guess one stat I would like to hear, a Larry McNugget, would be the last spin and win. I think the next time we can get a leader to kind of spin out, maybe we pull out that spin and win. It's just so hard to make your way back up through the field. One mistake, and it's like, okay, let's salvage the day, not let's go back and win the race. Where in the past, we've seen cars spin and win. We've seen guys go to the rear and drive back up. It's just so hard. So that would be the next thing I'd want to see on the broadcast, is get the leader to spin out maybe and with not enough damage, and see if they can. When was the last time someone spun and won? Because it's just not something we hear about now.
Yeah, you don't see it very often. Normally, when you look at the winner of the race, yeah, there maybe can something go on and go amiss in that first stage, and you can recover. But if you get into that second stage, or you get in that final stage, it's just so hard to overcome. Todd talked about it earlier. You know, the importance of clean air, just so hard to pass. I think it's clean air, but then I think it's just because of how close the competition is right now. Mm-hmm. I may have mentioned it earlier, but I look at that scoring monitor during practice, during qualifying, during the race. Heck, the top 20 or 25 cars are all running within a couple of tenths of each other. So you have one mistake, especially in the latter part of the race, it's going to be very, very hard to overcome. There was a race here recently, though, where Larson, he didn't win the race. And for the life of me, I can't remember which race it was, but he actually spun. And I think he only lost about 3 or 4 spots when he spun, because he spun and he kept going.
Richmond, right?
Right.
Yeah, it was Richmond.
If he can do it, Kyle Larson would be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, we've seen Kyle Busch spin a few times and just stay on the lead lap, and it's like on the restart, I'm like, wait, wasn't Kyle the reason the caution came out? And all of a sudden he's running 14th, and he's just, man, he's probably the heaviest favorite every week to spin out. Like, if you have to pick someone to spin out in practice
he's
or
been
the race,
a lot lately with his car.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely been wild to see. We expect the 8 to contend a heck of a lot more. And Larry, we had Kurt Busch on a couple of weeks ago, and we refrained from asking many questions about the mental state for his brother and some of the frustrations that he may be going through right now. You see him at least get to victory lane on the truck side, but I know it has not been a happy union thus far through the first 2 seasons with the A car and their inability to compete on anything other than really super speedways and, you know, intermediate tracks to a lesser extent. The short track package, a long way to go. But Larry, can't thank you enough for all of your time and answering our questions here to make, you know, not only Chris and myself smarter, when it comes to the Cup Series, but all of our loyal Stay Green listeners. Folks can follow your great work during Fox's portion of the NASCAR broadcast, NASCAR on Fox. You can see Larry multiple times during the week on Race Hub. You can listen to him nearly every day on Sirius XM on Track with our friend Danielle Trotta. But Larry, final word to you. Any parting shots, anything else you'd like to plug? I want to give you the floor, my friend.
No, I appreciate it. I was really tickled to death when you reached back out to me. I know enjoyed it with you guys the last time. Glad we could make this work. And, you know, I know I mentioned the favorites right now. You've got the guys over there at Joe Gibbs Racing. We got Hendrick Motorsports. But I can promise you there's somebody laying in the weeds right now that we probably didn't even mention their name during this interview right here that's going to come to life late regular season, about the time the playoffs start. And just like Joey Logano 2 years ago, just like Ryan Blaney last year, there's somebody we're not talking about that's going to be there and going to steal the show. I truly believe that. It's going to be something.
I was going to say, I got a feeling that one car may come to life this weekend, and we may suddenly start talking about the Melon Man being that guy, knowing how well he's run at Dover and how favorable the end of season setup may look for him if he's able to get himself into that final 8 or the final 4.
Yeah, top 3 finishes. The last 2 races there with the Gen 7, third 2 years ago, second to Truex last year. So, you know, the Melon Man, he's ready to smash the watermelon. It's been a while. We got to go up to the last race of the year at Phoenix, but last time he squashed one on the straightaway there.
Yeah, I was going to say it'll be one of the I don't even know the right word to describe it. The race win that everyone forgets, knowing that it was all about that 12 on that first Sunday in November from Phoenix, when you're not racing for a championship and you have the dominant race car, but they have that in their bag of tricks. And you wonder if they get there again with a chance to win, if he can replicate that performance. You can follow Larry Mack on X at Larry Mack 28. Larry, enjoyed it immensely, and enjoy the next upcoming couple of races. Dover, Darlington, Kansas, Charlotte. It is a great time of year to be a NASCAR fan, and especially from a betting perspective, all tracks that we are happy to tangle with.
No, we're excited about the month of May. Hard to believe we are closing in on the end of our 24th season with NASCAR on Fox. Wow. Over a third of my life has been spent with Fox, but hopefully I'll spend the next third of my life with them. That's what we're hoping for.
Well, that all depends. I don't want to say too many nice things about Adam Alexander around here if he's out there listening. So you and I can have that banter off air. But Larry, thanks again for all your time. We really appreciate it today.
Thank you. You guys take care. Appreciate it.
I think the most impressive part of getting Larry Mack on, Chris, and for those folks who are listening only on audio, is how you dressed up for the occasion. I mean, you brought out your formal attire, tuxedo T-shirt and everything to try and make sure that you could impress Larry Mack.
Yeah, and to get no comment kind of hurt my feelings, but Larry Mack's the best. I don't care. If you don't like Larry Mack, that's probably a you problem. You know, it's definitely not a Larry Mack problem. That was an awesome interview. And these are the questions I feel like we're trying to ask the questions that race fans don't understand, or just questions even. I feel like we're fairly well versed in this sport, NASCAR, that I didn't understand. And so it's great to have access to his mind, and for him to take over a half an hour of his time is it's awesome. And the fact we get him every year is great. For sure. And to lay the foundation for breaking down one of the more difficult tracks that we'll go to, we make an annual trip to Dover, Delaware. And to Larry Mack's point, it's unlike anywhere else that we go in the Cup Series. So as we wave the green, white checkered flag on the interview with Larry Mack for stage 2, we'll go directly into stage 3, but do want to encourage all of you, our loyal listeners, to follow Chris on social media at ChrisWerme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. And as always, follow the podcast for all things Bet the Board at Bet the Board Pod. And so for stage 3, Worm, it's all about a Dover deep dive of sorts. And when we look at Dover, it is a 1-mile concrete oval. They call it the Monster Mile for a reason, arguably one of the best trophies in NASCAR. If you get to take miles home, I was going to ask Larry Mack if he could send me a replica with his connections. It would go perfectly in my man cave, but alas, I've forgotten. You know, some of the things that we asked Larry that he kind of shed some light on, always fascinating when it comes to track comps, the challenges he had as a crew chief when it came to setting up the car accordingly. When you look to try and build out
some of your process? Are you going back and watching any other races, or is it, hey, look, we have one data point each year, at least now. We did used to run twice a year at Dover, but in the next gen, one race in 2023, one race in 2022. That's all I'm going to use, combine it with current form, and it's how I'll start to arrive at some of the conclusions that I can apply to at least the pre-week betting market.
I think it's really, I always watch the most previous race that was run at the track.
The most previous, also known as the most recent for those of us that speak English.
Yeah, what Todd said. Let's go with that. I feel like he's right on this one. The most recent race.
It's amazing. We record this podcast, and for folks that don't know you, you may be one of the most well-read individuals out there, very philosophical in your approach. And then when it comes to articulating your thoughts, sometimes there's a little bit of a problem. So I can understand why your lovely wife may not choose to talk to you for extended periods of time. And if you have to reflect on your thoughts on long walks throughout the course of the week, it's all coming together for me.
Most recently anyway, the last race at Dover, I went back and watched that one.
We can continue.
I think that I think it's important to understand kind of the flow of the race and how drivers got to the lead, whether they were to drive there or they inherited track position, like we saw with Chase at Texas. And that's going to be the only comp you really use. Gosh, there is an element to where certain drivers, I think, do excel on concrete tracks. We only have 3 tracks where you can kind of compare that. One of them is going to be a short track in Bristol. The other would be Nashville, but they all drive so very differently. But it is one of those tracks that, because it's so different, I think you can go back and look at track history previous to even this next gen car. Now, I didn't do that as much because, if you go back and let's say you look at Kyle Busch, well, he is exceptional at Dover. Do I think Kyle Busch is going to be exceptional this weekend? Well, no, I don't, because his recent form has shown an inability to pass cars, stay on the lead laps, qualify well. So you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt when you look at history, but know that when you're looking at the historical finishes of a driver at a track, that you take into account the equipment that they're in. And right now, for example, like I said, Kyle Busch been great at Dover, but I don't expect him to be great this weekend.
And more on Kyle Busch in a bit, like we've done for a lot of the most recent races, kind of break things up based on tiers. So as far as tier 1 drivers are concerned, I mean, Kyle Larson is your favorite this week, and prices at some prominent books shorter than 4-1. Do shop around if you want to bet the 5 before they unload this weekend. When you look at other drivers who perform well, you can understand why Martin Truex Jr. finds himself in that same tier, along with Denny Hamlin, William Byron, who's been the model of consistency. And I think the other driver that I'll put in this group that might surprise some folks would be Ross Chastain, who hasn't exactly been great this season, but when it comes to Dover, has the best average finish of 2.5, the best driver rating, the best average running position, and total speed ranking, which make him elite by number 1 standard. So when you look at those 4 drivers, don't need to spend a ton of time on each of them. Anything in particular you'd like to highlight or that stands out in terms of how you're handicapping the top of the field?
Well, I just think every time you bring up Kyle Larson, just have this on repeat. Yes, Kyle Larson should be the favorite this week. However, he doesn't get good finishes, and you can go ahead and tape that and then put it for Kansas next week, Darlington the following week, maybe not Gateway, maybe Sonoma, Iowa, maybe not. But for the most part, Kyle Larson is going to find himself in the top 3 when it comes to betting favorites. He's just not getting the finishes. And by the way, that's where you get paid when you bet people to win the race. So, sometimes it might be better to look for other avenues in order to make money on Larson leading laps. It's just, man, it's hard to finish off a race. And we've seen Kyle struggle to do it. When it comes to Martin Truex Jr., this is a guy that this track has really agreed with. I think he's in 2022, he didn't win the race, but he was out there running very fast laps. I thought he was super competitive in 22. And I think he would, if you look at last year and you try to be as objective as possible, I think that there were 3 cars that were probably very similar. The one of Ross Chastain, Martin Truex Jr., and then the 5 of Kyle Larson. It was just whoever made the least amount of mistakes on pit road under green flag stops and was able to cycle to the lead. They were so equal that it was just so hard to pass. So I think that Truex did a great job of just managing the race, getting the lead, and then not making a mistake after that. I think if Chastain inherits the lead after green flag stops, I don't think Truex makes the pass there. So that's why it's important to go back to watch these races. Now, when it comes to Denny Hamlin, Denny called his shots, and I'd be kind of curious what his record is on calling his shots. He called it on actions detrimental that he's going to win this week. I think he's going to be good. I think Denny's good most places. I don't think he's going to be, I don't anticipate him being the best. Can he win? Of course he can. But I think that this price, there's two ways you could go on this 8-1 price. You could say Denny Hamlin on an oval at 8-1, probably a good price. And for most places, I would agree with you. I would say that, yes, that's fair enough. However, there's guys that just tend to be a little better. And I think that they're properly priced at that, that Truex at 7 and Kyle at 5. So I'd rather just see Denny unload and see how he runs. I don't see him going off less than 6-1. I think he'd have to be really fast in practice in order for that. But Denny's also a guy where you can take a short price on him if you feel comfortable that he's going to lead a lot of laps and be there at the end. That might be the best number you get. Did we go over Byron too, or did you want me to?
No, you can touch on Byron. And one final thing though, before we close the book on Larson and Hamlin. I mean, we look at these guys and we know how short their numbers are each week. Kyle Larson, 4 top 10 finishes so far this season. So not exactly someone that you can hang your hat on with a consistent finish. And Denny Hamlin's been even worse in that department. 3 top 10 finishes for Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin has 2 wins this year. There is only top 3s. There is only top 5s. And he only has 1 other top 10 when he hasn't won a race. So he is the definition these days of wreckers or checkers, or so it feels. And given what we learned from Larry Mack, look, it's all about winning races and the value that comes in that. So you can understand why his playbook is a lot more extensive and why Denny is willing and able to take some of those risks. But the other driver he talked about, who you just mentioned, William Byron, hasn't led a ton of laps, but he's got the wins. He's got the average finishes, and he has been the model of consistency with 7 out of 10 top 10 so far this season, including a run that's seen him go 7th at Talladega, 3rd at Texas, 1st at Martinsville, 7th at Richmond, and the win, of course, at Coda, making rights and laps.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to talk about, where drivers finish versus where they're running, because your eyeballs will tell you that Larson and Hamlin have been kind of dominating races, or at least been there. But when it comes to, cashing tickets, they're getting it done, and maybe in the win column. But if you're taking them in matchups, gosh, you're probably paying a little bit of a price, and there's a lot of risk there. So I think it's important to realize, you want to bet on the faster cars, but you also want guys that inherently finish races. And William Byron is the antithesis of Larson and Hamlin.
Yep.
7 top 10s that's really strong, especially when you throw in the variance that we do see at a place like Daytona where he won, and Talladega and in Texas is by no means an easy 1.5 mile track. So William Byron at 8-1 is, I think if you just look at it at face value, it could be a good bet. But when you go back and watch that race, he was outside of a top 5 car. He led a lot of laps, but after lap 30, 40, 50, Truex was able to run him down multiple times, as was Ross Chastain, as was Denny Hamlin. So, and I imagine that Kyle Larson you would have grouped in there had he lasted a little bit longer throughout the race. So, although I'm not going to argue with people saying, hey, he's 8-1, and a guy that's won 3 of the first 10 races has a good chance at winning. Yeah, I would agree with that. However, we can't just handicap these cautions at this point in the week. I don't see Byron getting too much shorter. Of course, could he go out there and pull it? Yes, but I would feel comfortable betting on or against William Byron if he's starting on the pole here. I just don't think it's a given, depending on how he looks in the practice, whether he's going to go out and automatically win the race or he's going to struggle. So this is just kind of a wait and see. And then to add to Chastain, I think this goes to show you how much sharper books have become over the years. In years past, I think that we see a higher number on Ross Chastain, but this goes to show you that the amount of people that are talking about the sport or have access to data, I had Ross circled at it potentially opening up at 12-1, and maybe that would be a price, but the books showed that they're a little sharper than that and opened him at 8. This is probably properly priced. I don't think that there's any value on him at 8, especially with how he's qualified. If you look at last year, I know that it was rained out but he was able to work his way up through the field. And I'm very comfortable, for whatever reason, Concrete does agree with Ross Chastain. He's one guy where you could say, yep, he did well. He was obviously super fast at Nashville last year and super fast here at Dover. I know Bristol's kind of an animal in its own, but this Chastain price, although it's a little short, I think they got it right, because if he was any higher, I think we would have pulled the trigger on him at this point.
No, I think what you said makes a ton of sense, that sometimes, look, you can have these guys circled and the betting market, at least on the initial openers, doesn't agree. But if Ross qualifies 15th to 18th, the 5, the 11, the 24, all look like they're lightning fast, there is a chance that that number could be on the drift once we see practice unfold. When we go into tier 2, you mentioned prices at 12 to 1, and there are a couple of drivers that have seen their numbers come down. Chris Bell, when it comes to concrete, has been very good on this particular surface. Ty Gibbs, seemingly every week, it's a broken record. I know his current form hasn't been great over the last few races, but gets bet down based on potential. And when you look at how he raced here in the Xfinity Series, you can understand why. Chase Elliott starting to see his odds shorten nearly every week right now. His 15th at Talladega ended a run of 3 straight top 10 results, but his average finish of 10.8 this season is amongst the series best thus far, and he's been very good at the Monster Mile. And then, of course, Ryan Blaney, who did real well here last year. Problem for Blaney is he hasn't been the model of consistency lately. When he did register his first career top 3 finish at 121 driver rating, that goes in stark contrast to how he has historically run at the Monster Mile. So when we're looking at some of the drivers in the teens, are there any that really catch your eye?
Well, yeah, there actually is one of those 3, but I want to start with Chris Bell. Ooh, kind of a rough showing. If you look at the last 4 races, issues everywhere. And then especially Richmond, where I think he had a chance of winning that race. He was on the Denny Hamlin 2-stop strategy, but also delaying it by 6 or 7 laps, so that way he could have fresher tires running to the end. I think he probably wins that race without that speeding penalty. He's just been a little disappeary. Just kind of gets lost in the mix. And I think that's why you're seeing Chris Bell drift out to this 12 to 1 price, where, if we were to see this earlier in the season at like a Las Vegas or Phoenix, I think we would have jumped all over it. But, some randomness has kind of caught up to him. And this isn't his best track. And I just think that the 19, the 5, the 11, and 1 have separated themselves so much from the group that's why you're seeing Chris Bell priced in this range. Yeah, if Chris Bell unloads or qualifies in the top 5, maybe you see his price drop a little. But if anything, I think you could see him maybe struggle a little bit and find a higher price on him. So if you think he looks better before the race, you're probably going to get a better price on him. Ty Gibbs, after the Clash, I predicted that the car that he drove in the Clash will be the best car he has all year. And so far, I've been right. That car got out to a 3-second lead on a quarter-mile track. I know you've heard me say this before. And now he's being priced with guys that have won races. And although Ty hasn't won a race, the other thing he hasn't done is just go out and drive to the lead. And we have seen other drivers in this price point go out and drive to the lead. Especially Chris Bell. So, and Chase Elliott, we didn't talk about Chase. We'll talk about him in a second. Let's talk about Ryan Blaney. 18 to 1 on Ryan Blaney. Now, historically, this is the historical versus, kind of current form thing. The Fords have not been strong. We talked about it with Larry Mack and how much they've struggled with this new body pack or new body. However, Blaney was pretty strong here last year. I thought he was kind of a, maybe a distant 5th or 6th place car, but he was kind of hanging around. Here's the thing. I do think that Ford needs to find something. If Ford does find something, whether it's a little bit of horsepower or it is some aero that they're able to figure out, Ryan Blaney is the most likely driver to go out there and get a win. And that's why he's also the shortest price for it. But 18 to 1 is still a decent price for the former champion. And I don't hate a Ryan Blaney play at 18 to 1. If you just don't think Ryan Blaney should be 18 to 1 on an oval, yeah, it's a standalone oval, but it is an oval. And Ryan Blaney's gotten it done on many ovals in the past. So this is probably my favorite price of these drivers kind of in the teens.
No, it makes a world of sense. I mean, look, Blaney's a guy that I think has a wide range of potential outcomes. I mean, if he's able to
Yeah.
capture the same caliber of performance we saw last year, he's got top 5 potential. If Fords are a step behind and continue to struggle, I mean, Blaney could return to what we've typically seen at Dover, where he runs outside the top 10 more or less from start to finish. So high upside there at that 18-1 price tag. Would be very curious to see what the 12 looks like during practice. So if we go from tier 2 to tier 3, a lot of household names here, and shop around because this is where there's the most volatility, variance, whatever term you want to use to describe these guys. Kyle Busch, anywhere from 20-1 down to 25-1. Brad K, 20-1, upwards of 22-1. Joey Logano, I've seen that price on the drift all the way out to 30. Chris Buescher, 30-1 has come down. It's gone up. Tyler Reddick, last week's winner at Talladega, riding a wave of momentum. And Alex Bowman, who's actually had some success at this particular track in the past. So when we begin to go through those guys, are there some drivers that you're looking to buy? Are there some you're looking to sell? How are you approaching kind of that de facto third tier as we head toward the Monster Mile?
Well, if you go by what Larry Mack was saying and how many past champions have won here, you'd probably look at this group of drivers and say, wow, you're going to give me past champions at 20-1, 20-1, 20-1, and Kyle Busch, Brad K, and Joey Logano, and say, hey, maybe we just take those 3 guys and hope like hell Larry Mack's right. I don't know that it's that cut and dry. I just find it interesting that because this is such a standalone track, what is it that kind of propels drivers to go out there and lead laps and potentially win? Kyle Busch used to be awesome here, and he was leading laps last year. He
also used to be awesome at Bristol and some of the other tracks that we've gone
and exactly. To. So, yeah, you could probably say it about Kyle Busch everywhere, but I used to kind of think of Dover as, Kyle was going to go out there and lead laps and contend for the win. However, I don't think that this year. I think that, again, he's most likely to spin every week. And I haven't seen him drive past cars. Like we look at some of these other drivers, William Byron's past cars, Chris Bella's past cars, Denny Hamlin's past cars. Kyle Busch has just kind of been passed. And it's
a fair way to look at it. There's no doubt about it.
It's hard to back him. I know he's Kyle Busch. I think this price is too short. I feel like he's overvalued probably in matchups as well. Brad Keselowski, it is interesting. They've been able to hold on to track position a little bit better, in my opinion. And what I mean by that is they haven't been able to drive to the lead, but whenever they were able to go out there and get into the top 10 or get into the top 5, they're able to hold on to their position kind of throughout the day and kind of solidify themselves in the top 10. You could say the same thing about Joey Logano. But with that means that they haven't qualified well and they haven't looked good in practice or whatever field they're looking for in the race car, they haven't found until later in the race. And when you're looking at beating the market, I don't think you're doing that at this point in the week by looking at any one of these guys. On the flip side, I will say we were buying a little bit of Chris Buescher at that 30-1 opener. I think this is a good track for him. If you look back at the Xfinity series, he's had some success here and he's really consistent. He's just kind of growing on me as a driver. That's just someone you can trust. He doesn't have that same high variance like Chris Bell, someone that's has a lot of speed, but also finds themselves not getting finishes. I do think that Chris Buescher is, one of the guys that just goes out there and gets it done, no matter what kind of race car is underneath him. Reddick is an interesting one. He hasn't fared that well here, but he's in a Toyota and he's 25-1. So, okay. Yeah, if you were to come to me and say you like Reddick
his
this
scheme,
week,
however, not nearly as cool as his teammate's scheme this week, though. I don't know if you've seen the video circulating from 2311 for Bubba. I'll have to ship it to you for the U.S. Air Force. It's top shelf.
Oh, really? That's awesome. I mean, the winning last week was just another sick ass scheme. I've never been a paint scheme guy in my life, but this Jordan brand is so culturally relevant to people our age. I just think it's cool as hell.
Yeah, it's definitely different. No knock on some of the extremely valuable partners in the sport, but I can't imagine you've ever looked at a car unload and go, you know what? I need to run out and I need to get that interstate battery right now because of that green screen.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of them where I'm like, I don't even know what some of these things are. I'm just not in that auto world per se. But man, seeing that Jordan brand go to victory lane, seeing Jordan there was pretty cool. I think there's tremendous upside to Reddick. I think there's a way better chance Reddick goes off at 12-1 versus 35-1.
I think that's a great way to look at it. I mean, for all these drivers in that mid-tier pricing, I mean, that's, as we've always talked about, the best way to kind of look at ways to build your portfolio to try and be able to do it. And I think he definitely fits that profile. Alex Bowman feel the same way. I mean, could be a guy that goes off at 12-1-ish if he unloads well, or you still, hey, look, we're still Alex Bowman, even if he's out there in the fastest car and he's on the pole. I mean, this is a guy that you're going to see open up at 16-1 post-practice.
Yeah, I would say out of Tyler Reddick and Alex Bowman, there's a better chance of Bowman opening 40 than there is, or 35 than there is Reddick, just
Very
based
fair.
on speed. However, we have seen some stuff out of Bowman, whether it was at COTA. He ran pretty well at Martinsville for a while. Didn't see that much out of him at Texas, but I trust Alex Bowman as a driver. He's a guy that on a late race restart, he tends to get it done, but he can also get lost. And I think that's a little bit of a concern, especially when you see his teammates winning races. And he's clearly now the fourth best Hendrick car. But there is a lot of upside too. I think Bowman, if he were to pull it, gosh, he'd probably go off at 10-11-1. But he's also a guy that if he looks good or he qualifies decent, he can get you paid in some auxiliary ways, whether it is a top 10 or some matchups against a Briscoe or something like that. Because I do think if he has a top 10 car in practice, he's going to get a top 10 finish. And so I think he's just a really predictable guy. At this point in the week, I don't know that he's going to be predictably good or predictably bad at that point.
Hey, look, there's certain drivers that you want to zero in on when the week gets started based on track type, their driving capabilities. There are others where they have a wider range of potential outcomes. And I think you take that wait and see approach, whether it's for the outright market or, as you mentioned, some of the ancillary markets that are there from a head-to-head standpoint, top 3, top 5, the derivative stuff that we oftentimes look to focus on. But, it's a great way to try and go about it. It is a fun track to watch, and we can only hope that Mother Nature gives us the kind of racing that we have come to anticipate from Dover this time of year. You can follow Chris on X at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. You can follow this week's guest at Larry Mac 28. That's LARRYMAC 28. And of course, for all things Bet the Board, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And as we get into the best bet portion of the program, Worm, last week we commiserated on Brad Keselowski going off at 14-1, finishing second, which amounts to $0 hitting our accounts, unless folks bet him in a variety of different ways that we quite frankly advised against, given the unpredictable nature of Talladega, whether they be head-to-head matchups, top 3s, top 5s, or top 10s. Don't fall victim to confirmation bias or let bad habits start to seep into how you're going to bet NASCAR. But when we look for a best bet opportunity this week, not sure what you found, whether it is a top 5, top 10 outright market, or potentially a limited offering head-to-head that may or may not be readily available for all of our listenership.
Well, it's funny when I went back and just kind of generally looked at who runs well at Dover, and you look back and you go back a long ways. There's this guy that pops up that seems to win here a lot more than everybody else that's running this week. Now, I'm not saying to run and go bet Jimmy Johnson to win. However, this is the perfect example of
175-1, baby. If you believe that the 48 now turned 84 can get it all together here and figure out the next gen car, that price is awfully attractive.
Yeah. This is where you kind of have to look at through the lens of, okay, what kind of equipment are they in? But I wonder if Johnson even, gosh, can he finish on the lead lap? I would say if I had to put
chance. At Dover, there is minimal chance that Johnson is finishing on the lead lap, because unless you get a boatload of cautions, he gets himself down a few laps. He's not going to be able to get all those laps.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Like, will he finish less than 6 laps down, or put his over under on laps down at like 6.5? I don't know. Maybe that's too many. I think if you get a lot of green flag runs though, and he has one issue, he's in trouble. But we're not going to be betting on Jimmy Johnson. It is just kind of fascinating how much success that this team, or that driver has had at a track. So we're going to stick actually in the fade Kyle Busch, and we're going to do that with a guy named Tyler Reddick, last week's winner at Talladega. He is -125 over Kyle Busch. at DraftKings, and I think that that's kind of the best matchup on the board. I do think that odds makers did a pretty good job here this week when it comes to pricing, and I thought that we maybe picked off a little bit of Busher at 30, but other than that, it's been a pretty light week. But I just think if you're looking at the 10,000 foot view of the sport and you find Tyler Reddick, a Toyota, matched up against a RCR Chevy minus 125, I think you take that every time at this point in the season.
Yeah, I can't argue with that sentiment at all. And you mentioned Chris Busher. There are still some good prices out there. I believe a couple of shops do still have 30. So if folks wanted to nibble there, to be right alongside us and backing the 17 as one of our early pre-week outrights would have no qualms whatsoever.
And this was that's for everyone. It's probably like a quarter unit bet. I mean, we're just trying to steal the market here on that.
I'm not even sure I'd go that far with a quarter unit, knowing the nibble we took there. But yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I guess relative to what we actually bet in matchups, it might have been smaller than that. But this is just the other thing too is just because we took him at 30 does not mean that if he looks good in practice and he's now 16, we'll add. Like, we have no problem adding to that position. It's just, let's steal a little bit of a price here. And because that way, when we add again at 16, hopefully we'll see. That means we think that there's value, potential of him closing at 10 to 12 to 1. Now, I'm not saying that's what's happening here. I'm saying that this is all a possibility. And whenever you can kind of reduce the hold that odds makers have, you're increasing your chances of winning. And that's the goal, is to make money in the end.
And like always, with a track that we like to bet, we'll offer up some race day opportunities as well. So be sure to check the Bet the Board podcast website. We'll tweet that out as we always do. And for those folks looking for a little additional race day coverage, Chris does an outstanding job with his pre-race poll. And as I look at the start time for this weekend's race, Chris, I don't actually know what time it's scheduled to go off.
I think it's a 2 o'clock start.
So, yeah, you get to actually sleep in then. You don't have to have a cocktail at 4:30 in the morning out there on the West Coast.
It's a 2 o'clock Eastern start, so it's a little earlier. So, yeah, it's an 11 a.m. start. Yeah, it says time is 2 p.m. Eastern.
Do they have lights at Dover? I never remember. Yeah, we have lights at Dover.
No, they don't have lights at Dover. I think that's probably why they have that earlier start time. So, and you're joining me for the pre-race poll this week, am I not?
That I am. I will be locked and loaded. So you'll just have to give me my marching orders. I'll cue you up. I'll tell you you're an idiot, and I have to figure out my beverage of choice.
Yeah, what are you going to go with?
I'm limited because, malt and that sort of thing, not exactly kosher for Passover. So I have to try and figure out in terms of what I can actually drink. So I may have to go right to the hard liquor. We may do a little show. We may do a little Chopin on the rocks at 11 o'clock in the morning out here on the earlier than that at 9:30 or whenever the hell time you tell me.
We're going to go. So we'll go at 9 a.m. It'll be a 9 a.m. Pre-race poll, 9 a.m. Pacific. It'll be noon Eastern for that. So I don't know. I was kind of hoping you might go for Boone's Farm. I figured that'd be kind of your standard,
Under normal circumstances, I would maybe a little high gravity 40 or something along those lines to really drive the message home. A little bit more challenging, so I'll have to be smart and figure out strategically what I can put together. But looking forward to joining you on the pre-race poll this week. Should be a lot of fun. And thanks to all of you guys and girls out there that tune into the Stay Green podcast every week. Hopefully you enjoyed our interview with Larry Mack as much as Chris and I did. Conducting that. Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, his perspective and everything he's learned to be in and around the sport for as long as he has, with his 20 plus cup victories, 200 plus top 10s, bevy of top 5s, polls, and everything else. And we'll continue to add to our guest portfolio as we get deeper into the campaign with some other big names. So anything else you'd like to share with our loyal listeners before we bid them a fond farewell?
No, I just want, I want in the future to do a fireside chat with Larry Mack. I think that would be just a great show. Myself, not as well versed in kind of some of the NASCAR heyday, Dale Earnhardt and in kind of that time period from, 85 to, when he was around till, was he almost 1999? So he was around for a long time as a crew chief. He's been involved with the sport. He's seen everything. I imagine once he retires and maybe steps back, see if we can get him a little, unfiltered would be an awesome thing to just to have for the audience.
We'll see what we can pull off there. But again, special thanks to Larry Mack. We know that all NASCAR fans, if you're tuning in to Fox broadcast and have been for the last 20 plus years, you know what he adds to that telecast each and every week. So best of luck with whatever investments you choose to make of the pre-week and race day variety this weekend from Dover for the Würth 400. I'll be joining Chris on the pre-race poll. We'll share some best bets and try and make you guys and girls smarter heading into the dropping of the green flag on race day. But most importantly, with a Tyler Reddick ticket in hand in his head-to-head matchup over Kyle Busch, we will see you at the window.